In this week's Torah portion, Pharaoh hardens his heart, and the final 3 plagues are unleashed. Ultimately, it leads to the death of his firstborn child, which is too heartbreaking to consider. In the midst of this stubbornness and all this death and destruction, I felt a need to go back to the beginning of the story to lift up the civil disobedience of the nurse midwives who refused to carry out Pharaoh's orders and allowed all of the Israelite babies to live. What makes them say no to Pharaoh? Why were their hearts not hardened? It is surprising. The Egyptian nurse midwives lived in a hierarchical society in which the rulers were considered gods and the slaves were considered subhuman. Pharaoh was convinced of the need to exterminate the vermin, but the midwives were not. Why then do some resist? According to David M. Markowitz and Paul Slovic, research on dehumanization is vast and spans disciplines, with studies investigating how people dehumanize, representations of dehumanization in media, and how dehumanization affects attitudes towards groups, and estimates of the groups that are likely to be dehumanized more than others. Its evidence has been summarized as the 4 main theoretical perspectives on dehumanization, all of which generally suggest that aspects of humanity are denied to groups of people. These theories are largely consistent with each other and complementary, but rely on different indicators to measure or infer the dehumanization. In all cases, those who were dehumanized are viewed as lacking some attribute that might make them fully human. The Pharaoh dehumanized the Israelites and viewed them as objects of his will. He decided whether they may leave or stay. He decided whether their life was easy or hard. He decided whether they lived or died. They had no human agency in his view, and no human capacity for cognitive freedom. The nurse midwives, on the other hand, respond to the Israelites as fully human and fully worthy of redemption. In Gershuni Contemporary Women's Midrash, Orna Pilz also wonders about the midwives and their exceptional courage. Her text, written in the Midrashic voice, grounds this courage in the belief in God. The midwives were asked, this is the text, "Where did you get your fearful awe of God?" And they answered, "From the great and deep things that we saw at the birth stool, from the mystery that embraces us morning and evening, human being after human being coming into the world. Where does he come from, and what does she bring with her? The goodness that her mother sees in him, the compassion and the love that she awakens, crying babies bursting forth from exhausted bodies, and the soft seal of God's finger imprinted on their faces." It's a beautiful passage, as it suggests that the midwives view the Israelite babies as a mother would, with the love that might come from viewing newborn life. And I love that. The midwives were challenged. But didn't it happen at Sinai that all the people saw the thunder and the lightning and the smoking mountain, and the people saw it and trembled and stood far off? And Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, to keep the fearful awe of God before you, so that you will not transgress." The fearful awe of God comes from the place of thunder and lightning. That's the challenge. We're not told in this midrash who challenges the midwives. Rather, it's a philosophical challenge. Doesn't it come from big awe, thunder, and lightning commandedness, and not from the sweet, soft face of a newborn child? How can you insist that it's the baby's faces that turn you to the good, rather than the being behind all being, the one who commands us? And the midwives answered, "There is fearful awe that comes from external seeing, and there is fearful awe that comes from internal vision. A person can be frozen in terror, witnessing a supernatural miracle, which awakens and strengthens her sense of fearful awe. But for us, it doesn't work like that. Our fearful awe is not in the heavens," they're quoting the Torah. "Our fearful awe of God arises precisely from within nature, from within the pain of what we witness on the birth stool. From there, we learn to choose what is good, to protect life, to fight against death, and to resist evil. The midwives understood that every newborn child has infinite worth, and that's what keeps them from dehumanizing. Why can I not say that? It's probably not a bad thing that I have had trouble with that word, dehumanizing the Israelites, and what gives them the courage to deliver the Israelite babies in defiance of Pharaoh's edict, even if it might mean their own death. My own strength derives from God, and for me, the babies' faces would be a reminder that all of us are created in the image of God. But what I find particularly interesting and indeed compelling about this midrash is the fact that the Israeli women, these Israeli rabbis, are seeking a more universal basis for human rights in the common experience of birthing children, a shared humanity that doesn't require a shared faith tradition. I like that. They're saying that we are all parents, even when we're not literally parents, in that we have responsibility to the generations that follow us, and we raise up these children in our communities, either directly as their parents or indirectly as the community that sets the norms and values by which they live. We should extend that same loving concern to the stranger, the widow, the orphan. That also includes the migrant, the immigrant, the asylum seeker. This week, the liberal movements within Judaism issued a rare joint statement, like I can't remember one in the 22 years I've been a rabbi, speaking out against the dehumanization of immigrants by ICE. As they wrote, adding our voices to the millions of others across the United States, leaders of the Reform, Conservative/Masorti, that's their Hebrew name, Reconstructionist movements of Judaism condemn, in the strongest terms, the violence with which the Department of Homeland Security is enforcing American immigration law, above all in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as well as in cities and towns across the nation. In this statement, the movements specifically affirm the right to protest the actions of ICE, state that we are and should remain a nation of laws, and call for a thorough investigation into Renee Nicole Good's death. And I really appreciate this statement, I really do. And I'm proud of the unity that it represents among the liberal movements in Judaism. We should be working together in this matter at this critical moment. At the same time, it still feels insufficient. Woefully so, really. What's needed in this moment, actually, is the bold risk-taking courage of the midwives. I'm very proud of this congregation's response to the demand of the hour. At Yom Kippur, I spoke about the urgent needs we have regarding counteracting this harsh immigration enforcement. And since then, more than 60 volunteers have shown up for the training to accompany immigrants to their legal proceedings. And we have also donated very significant money, nearly $100,000, to the organizations working on the front lines of this crisis. If you have the means, please do donate, either to our internal organization, Sukkot Shalom, or to the link in the congregation in St. Paul that we distributed in this week's email message. This is the right path. I also want to let you know that on Wednesday, February 11th, from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m., Jewish clergy and community members will gather near the ICE headquarters in D.C. to oppose ICE's cruelty and violence. The event is organized by Truah, an organization for the rabbinic call for human rights, and this group has also organized large-scale Jewish clergy protests in Minneapolis, St. Paul this week. This brutality requires a grassroots response. I would wish also that the ICE officers would heed this call to protect the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. This isn't simply a coordinated and well-planned police action to report the worst of the worst, as they claim. It's often inchoate reactionary violence visited on brown people and protesters alike. The reality is that this violence is not good for any of us, not for the immigrant, not for the protester, not for the bystander, and not for the ICE officer. The evidence shows that over the long run, humans who are directly harmed themselves by the violence that they perpetrate. Speaking of the ICE officers, Times opinion writer Rachel Louise Snyder wrote this week, I wonder if they know how those who perpetrate violence can come to be haunted by their past actions, even if that violence is mandated by the state. Recently, I watched a documentary called In Waves and War, that premiered at Telluride. And the film follows 3 former Navy SEALs with severe PTSD. It is a moving examination of what it means to live in the aftermath of war, of the unbearable moral weight of what these men did and saw and endured. Each new generation, it seems, must relearn how difficult it is to find peace after war. These 3 men are racked by trauma. One wife says she could look into her husband's eyes and see he was simply not there. The men go to Mexico and use psychedelic drugs to treat their PTSD, and they expected, while on those drugs, to see images from the battles that they faced as Navy SEALs, battles in which they'd lost friends and been injured and nearly lost their own lives. But instead, says a man named DJ, what comes are visions from childhood of his father's rage and violence and humiliations, how terrified he was of his dad, and how he learned to mirror that rage and violence toward his own children. If we didn't abuse children, a veteran asks in the film, would we have a military? These men release their trauma, at least in part, through their own wrecked and cathartic sobbing. How rare, I think, to see a grown man drowning and then healing something in himself through anguished tears. Rare and beautiful, because he has finally engaged in the full range of what it means to be human. At this moment, we need a love that's stronger than hate, which brings us back to that breathtaking insight from our modern Israeli midrash. The midwives were asked, where did you get your fearful awe of God? And they answered, from the great and deep things that we saw at the birth stool, from the mystery that embraces us morning and evening, human being after human being, coming into the world. Where does he come from, and what does she bring with her? The goodness that her mother sees in him, the compassion and the love that she awakens, crying babies bursting forth from exhausted bodies, and the soft seal of God's finger imprinted on their faces. These are our babies, our children, our neighbors, our problem. Shabbat shalom.